Hello there. I am so glad that y'all are here with us tonight because this is going to be such a fun show. I've got a great guest. She is a prolific author. She is brilliant. She is actually Dr. Irena Scott. I'm so fortunate to be able to have her on. She is an author as well as a ufology researcher. She is she has written everything. She has written UFOs Today, 70 Years of Lies, Misinformation, and Government Cover Up. She has written Sacred Corridors, Secrets Behind the Real Project Blue Book, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Roswell, Battelle Memorial, Metal, um, Dr. Hynek, and UFO cover-ups. And I have to tell you that I am so interested in that particular topic. I met Paul Hynek at an event a couple of years ago, and he's brilliant. She's also written Females Going Ape, Generating Life and Civilization, Irena's Children, A True Story of Courage, Uncle, My Journey with Paul Perdue. And I'm going to tell you that she is she's just one of the most brilliant people. I'm I'm very honored to have her here. I have been aware of her for so long and finally got up the courage to reach out. And so now we get to have a conversation. Um, Before we get started, I want to let everybody know that if you want to get your Fate subscription kicked in, fatemag.com is the place to go and do that. And we give them away. So if you are in chat, you can we'll come up with a word. And at the end of the night, our prize generator, selection generator, will spit out a name. Hello, Lori. And we will have a giveaway. How fun is that? So, and I've got some old ones over here. You never know what you're going to get. So anyway, without any further ado, I'd like to bring on Dr. Irena Scott. Hi, Irena.
Hi, and I'm very honored to be here.
Well, I'm very honored to have you. You know, I have followed you for some time, and I wanted to make sure that I had enough information to do a good interview. So, I just, I'm looking at all this education and all this scientific background and the ufology fascination and brilliance. And then I saw, and I already asked you about it, but then I saw Christmas Tree Farm. And I I was just like, I love Christmas tree farms. And so that was like fun. And we did talk about that, and you did sell it, but it's a park with loads of Christmas trees, you said.
Big Christmas trees now.
I bet. Wouldn't that be fun, though? That would be something for like the White House or Kennedy Center or something. That would be cool.
It was really nice. All the people that stopped and buy Christmas trees are just really nice people. And I met a lot of very interesting people.
Well, that is a family tradition for us.
Did
And we go to the Christmas tree farm, and both my son's family and my daughter's family do that. And so if I'm lucky, I get to go with both sets. So I have the best time there. They have hay rides and they have pony rides and all the things that kind of just make you thrilled. They have like the little cloth Christmas ornaments for babies and stuff like that. So I bet you had a lot of fun with that.
It was a lot of work too, but
it is.
Meeting the people was the fun part.
Well, sure. But, people don't always realize what goes into running a business.
Yeah, you have to do it. You don't just do it at Christmas. You do it all year round.
Well, if you're going to have trees to sell at Christmas, you have to.
You have to chop them and mow them and everything else.
Well, I was going to ask, do those trees when you buy a Christmas tree, it's the iconic shape, right?
Hmm.
Actually grow like that?
No, um, you have to shape them. So I used to spend my spring after work shaping trees, getting that nice A shape.
It's so cool. And I've always wanted to know that. So so that's good. And I was going to say that everyone just enter the pound sign, Carl. Oh, no, he's going to update that. Um, it just shows a pound sign in
Oh,
chat.
No, everyone enter hashtag fake.
Ah,
It's at the bottom of the screen, scrolling.
oh, that's what you were pointing at.
Yeah.
I tell you what, he saves me from myself all the time. Well, Irina, I'm curious because when did you first become involved in ufology?
well, became involved when I was really young and before I knew what UFOs were, years before I found out what UFOs were. And that's because my sister and I kind of had a UFO experience in our bedroom when we were just tiny kids. One a UFO in our room, but we didn't know anything about UFOs or anything about it back then. But
Well, can I ask, because that was my first experience, was I saw something in our sky and then mentioned it to my parents and the people that were cooking out with us and was pooed away. And then that night when Jennifer and I went to bed, there were lights that came into our room, and it never woke her up, but it woke me up. And they weren't police lights or anything. There was green in there and white and such. But um, I hid under my covers like that was going to do a lot of good. So what was I was seventh grade? What did I know? Sixth grade. But what was your experience like?
well, um, we were real young. Um, she's real sure she wasn't in school yet, and I don't remember if I was in school or not. So we must have been maybe 6 or 4 or something. She was a couple of years younger,
Mm-hmm.
and I went to bed, and I woke up, and there was this thing flying around the room, and I'd never seen anything like it, but I was just curious, what is this?
Mm-hmm.
And after I watched, it came kind of close to us a couple of times, and it was just flying around the room. The room was closed; it was dark, and there was a window that was closed and a door, two doors that were both closed. So I don't know how it got in,
Right.
but I noticed that even though it was dark, it seemed to know where things were, and it wouldn't bump into anything. If it came to a wall, it would turn and go around the furniture and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't know what it was. And then it flipped to the ceiling, but it didn't hit the ceiling, it turned, and it was an attic room type thing with walls that went up about 3 feet apart. And there was a chandelier in the middle of the room. Well, it just flew around to the chandelier and began circling it. And it circled and circled and circled and circled. And then it came down in a spiral. And at that time, my sister and I both became terrified. And I didn't even know she knew it. I didn't even know she was awake. She apparently knew I was. So, and we started screaming and ran out of the room and fell down the stairs. And we were so scared we couldn't get the door open. And so finally we got the door open and we went screaming to our parents. And they told us, we didn't see anything.
Yeah, I got that too.
But there were two of us. And so, they would have said to either one of us, "You're dreaming," we'd have believed them, but both of us saw it.
That had to be, it's so freaky, right? Because I didn't know, I wasn't aware of ours being in the room with us before I ducked under the blankets. But it was I mean, it was red periodically, but primarily green and white flashing. And it wasn't like police lights with the swirls or anything. They were just flashing. And so I still don't know what that was, but that night I had seen something in the sky. And yeah, my dad was Special Forces, Green Beret, and they were airborne. They had a jump practice that day. So there were a bunch of the guys at our house with their families cooking out. And so I told my dad, I was like, what is that? Because it's not moving. And he was like, they all just kind of looked at each other and they were laughing. And they're like, oh, that's a helicopter. I said, no, it's not. I've watched y'all jump out of those forever. Y'all were doing it today. That's not a helicopter because there wasn't any noise.
Oh,
And, so, and you could hear those, I guess they were Deweys back then, but you could hear them from forever away. So, that was my first experience too. And I also was not taken seriously. So, kids. But when did you, did that just stay with you? And that curiosity is what led you to do all of the work that you've done on this? Or?
no, I had several other sightings, but I was in the field of science, so I didn't speak about them for a very long time. But my sister and I had another sighting when we were older, and we both had other sightings.
Were you together?
Yeah, we were together on another one when we were older.
Mm-hmm.
It was a pretty complicated sighting.
Really? Can you tell me about it?
Yeah. Well, we had our first one in Ohio where we grew up, and then we had both left home, and she was at Drew University taking post-grad work, and I was in Washington, D.C. working for the Defense Intelligence Agency, actually identifying airplanes. But anyway, and so we were both on the eastern end of the country, and we decided to go on vacation and go up to see the New England states. And so one morning, about 6 o'clock, I picked up two coworkers that wanted to go up to New York. She was in Drew University, which is real close to New York City in New Jersey, and drove up and got there and took some pictures of her and the dorm and the people with me and everything. And then she and I continued on. And we got to Boston. We were thinking about staying all night at Boston and then going up and seeing some more of the New England states. But we got there and it was light. And this was way before cell phones or anything.
Right.
We decided to go up and see a little bit of the New England states to start with. So we went up Route 3 and into New Hampshire and took some pictures there. And I found out years later that it's where the Hills had their experience. We were kind of in the bottom part of that. But anyway, we came back to Boston and looked for places to stay. And we didn't find anything. Everything seemed to be filled up. And so we decided to drive out of Boston and drive around the outer belt and look for places to stay. And so we were leaving Boston, and there was an airport south of it called the Norwood Memorial Airport. And we could see airplanes flying in and putting their landing lights on, and they look like standard airplanes with their red and green, wing lights and everything. But we saw something under these airplanes that seemed to be kind of following the freeway. And the airplanes look like the airplanes, but this one is just a blinking white light with no other lights. And my sister kept saying, "This is something odd." And I kept telling her, "Oh, it's a helicopter, Yeah. And she kept saying, "No, it's something odd." And so we were kind of arguing, and we kept on. And I got off the outer belt and went on Route 95, which is a big road a freeway that goes up and down the coast. And there was a woods on one side. As I was driving by there was this round thing in the woods, and it looked like glass on the outside, and it had a light on the inside that was sort of spinning around, and it was going from different colors, like between red and blue and purple, and just different shades of those colors. And it seemed to have something on it that was going kind of around it. And I had no idea what it was, but the inside of the car turned green. And I looked at the thing, and it wasn't green. And I thought, this thing is out there. What is that? And why is the inside of the car green? And I looked around. I didn't see green any place. And I wondered what on earth is going on. Well, then the green disappeared, and we were by that, whatever it was, and kept on driving. And my sister kept saying, this is odd. And she has real good eyesight. She's a bird watcher, and she could see a bird a mile away and look at their little tiny feathers and say, oh, there's a little white spot on their beak, things like that, I can identify an ostrich, and that's about as well as I do. But anyway, she has real sharp eyes, and she said later that the thing would be one place, and then it'd be someplace else, and then it'd be someplace else. And I was driving, and I was irritated, and just kept saying it's a helicopter. And then I told her that if it was a UFO, that the police would be out filming it, and newspapers would be out and everything, so it couldn't possibly be a UFO. And so finally, as we were driving along, she started screaming at me and said it was going to go over the road. And she screamed and screamed, and so finally I decided to stop. And I pointed my hand out the window, and I was going to say, see, it's a helicopter. Well, just then I saw this, what looked like a meteor way off in the distance. And then right when I saw that, this thing came over the trees. And then I realized that it wasn't a helicopter. It seemed to levitate. It didn't have it was just like a submarine shaped, or like a Tic Tac that they show now, but a big one. And it didn't make any sound at all. It had, when we both saw it, it had 7 big square windows along the side, and they were blinking in a sequence. And I'm not sure about the sequence. It was like maybe the first 3 were on and off and on and off, and then all 7, and then the last 4 back to the first 3, or something like that. And it had one little red light on one end and one little green light on the other. And these were just small little things that didn't blink or anything. And it didn't make any sound. And at that point, I realized that my sister had been right all along. And so I had a Polaroid. Back in those days. You didn't have iPhones.
Right.
I had a Polaroid that would take time exposures, and I had high-speed film in my car, but I had to find them. I was taking the pictures with just another old camera. So I had to find them, and I got both of them, and I was loading the Polaroid camera and wondering what on earth it was. And we were kind of discussing, like, how many windows do you see and things like that, to see if we were seeing the same thing, because it didn't make any sound, and it just was floating by real slow. And we thought we ought to be able to see people in it or something that would just light inside. So anyway, this truck driver pulled over in front of us, and he came back toward me, and we were both standing there. And I thought, oh, how wonderful. We're going to have another witness on this. So he came, and this thing was still up in the air, and big thing. And so he asked us what we're doing. And that seemed funny. And I didn't want to say UFO around a strange man, so I pointed at it and said, what's that? And he turned around the opposite direction, exactly the opposite, and looked up at the sky and said, I don't see anything. Then he turned around and faced me again and asked me the same question. And by that time, I was getting the creeps. And so I pointed at it again and said, what's that? And he turned around, looked in the opposite direction, and said, I don't see anything. Then he gave me a signal And I'm not too sure what it's like. I understood that he was telling me I was crazy or that I wasn't seeing it, like he pointed to his head or something. He went back to his truck. And I had just missed this wonderful picture. I mean, I thought I was, I worked in DIA in photography, and I thought I'll get a wonderful picture of a UFO and prove that they exist because I had high-speed film and I could get it on the freeway and everything, this big thing up there. And by the time he left, it was a long ways away. And my sister said later, years later, when we discussed it, that she didn't know the man was there, which was pretty spooky. I just found that out a couple of years ago.
No way. And she was standing right there with you?
Yeah, she knew he parked in front of us, but I just found this out a couple of years ago, that she didn't know that I talked to him. And she just thought it took me a real long time to get the film in my camera. I mean, all this time I'd been wondering what this man was. And then I found out that she didn't see him. But anyway, I thought I'd get this wonderful picture. And she said that while I seemed to be putting film in the camera, that the thing flew away a long ways. And I didn't notice that either. But by the time he'd left, well, I was still trying to get a picture, but the thing was a long ways away. And I thought I'd have to take a time exposure. And I thought I'd get light from the freeway traffic in my camera. And so there was a hill nearby, and I ran up the hill, and there was a bald spot on the top where I could get a picture.
Right.
So I got some pictures, and I came back. And only one picture turned out, but it was a good picture. And by that time, the object had sort of gone over the airport. It was circling the airport. It was kind of making a design like it would go north to south and north, and it'd blink on twice. And then it'd go north to south so fast you couldn't see it. And there were some noises there. And I thought maybe it's making like supersonic sound, like sonic boom or something, but it wasn't in phase with it at all. And so anyway, we were really curious about what it was, and I was just felt terrible because I didn't get this picture I wanted. And so we decided to go on down the freeway and find another intersection, turn around and come back. And so I got in the car and we drove, and the truck driver got right in behind me, got right on my bumper, turned his bright lights on, and chased us. I mean,
Oh my gosh, Irena.
Yeah, I thought we were going to get killed. He stayed right on my bumper and just blinded me by shining the lights in my mirror. And I didn't know what to do, and I'd slow down and speed up, and I was sort of scared to stop. And so anyway, he just stayed there. And so finally I thought that what I'd try to do is get to the next intersection whenever it came up, and swerve off the road from the left-hand side when he wouldn't be expecting me to, which was really dangerous because if somebody was coming faster on the right-hand side, we would have a crash. But anyway, I asked my sister if she could see behind us, and she said no. But I did it, and I got rid of him. She remembered the truck driver. She just didn't remember talking to him. And she remembered him following us and things. And so anyway, I turned around the intersection and came back, and the thing had been circling the airport, but then it started going northwest. And so we started following it, and I went by the green thing and by the light by the road, and the car turned green on the inside again, and we followed it up. And finally we got to this real old beat up road that was gravel with potholes and houses a long ways away and things. And it was just going at the speed where I just couldn't keep up with it. And so finally I turned around and decided to go back, and we still couldn't find a place to stay. So I wound up back in Drew that morning at 6 o'clock. And then I stayed and waited for these men that I'd taken with me for a long time, and they didn't show up. So I went back I drove back to Washington, D.C., and it was dark, and I had a poltergeist experience. After that,
Oh, wow.
so then the next morning I got up and went to work, and then I wrote everything up right afterwards. And my sister, she thought she wrote it up, but she couldn't remember. And then just about 2 years ago, she found a letter that she wrote to my mother that very day. And so we both had write-ups of that we'd done right afterwards. I was working for the Defense Intelligence Agency with this real high clearance, and I wasn't told anybody about it. And we called our mother that day from her dorm, but we didn't. I certainly didn't say anything at work.
Right? Yeah, because like to keep that clearance.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that makes money.
Yes.
Talking about UFOs at that point doesn't. So that is so bizarre, though, because was that after Betty and Barney's experience?
Oh yeah, but I didn't pay too much attention to it, and it was years later when I figured out that was, sort of the same place where they had the end of their experience, but I didn't realize that for years later.
That's the truck driver thing is so weird because in a lot of cases of high strangeness like that, there's somebody like that there. And, I know that you've probably heard so many people talk about that, but it stuck in my mind when I first started doing paranormal radio, because my other show is called Paranormal Experience. I've done it for 10 years now. And when I first started, I consider anything anomalous paranormal, basically, because if it's not normal, that falls into the right. So I, in fact, my first Alien Con that I was credentialed for, it was the first one. I was going as Paranormal Experienced. I wasn't doing Fate Magazine radio at that time. And they still considered me a researcher that fit that model. And it was, you could have knocked me over with a feather when I got those credentials. I was so excited. But, it was interesting because at that first Alien Con, they had some paranormal type guests, speakers, whatever. But hi, Tom McNicholas and Mark Getty. Glad to see y'all in chat. But it was so interesting to me because I got to talk to a lot of contactees. They didn't have experiencer groups like other conventions do, but because it was their first one and that wasn't what they were about. But there were a lot there. And people would just come together and chat. And I was so amazed. I learned so much about ufology there because I got to sit on every lecture from, people that don't do a lot of interaction to people that are just the propulsion people and stuff. So that was kind of interesting. But there's a lot of cases that have people like that truck driver show up, aren't there? They just, hi Irene, they just show up and do what this guy did to you, which is distract, create a disturbance, get into the emotions, make you uncomfortable, and prevent you from getting evidence that you would like to have because you were ready to grab that shot.
Oh, that would have been a fantastic.
Yeah. I'm a photographer too. I would have loved that shot. I haven't gotten one because they're too far away from me. But it's just, Irina, read the banner so that you can get your hashtag to sign in for the drawing. But it's just so wild that you had that happen before people were really knowing that that was happening. Because there's a lot of people in that period that were somebody showed up. this guy did that. And often they have people show up that have extremely abnormal behavior patterns. Like, you know, like their clothes aren't put on right, or, you know, the shoes are different, or, you know, there's all kinds of anomalies and weird behavior that comes in those environments. And I know you've talked to so many people who are also experiencers. I mean, do you do that? Is that something that you include with your research?
Yeah, I'm working with Philip Mantle
Yes.
with the Pascagoula.
Oh, that's my favorite thing that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, and so I'm interviewing a lot of the other witnesses, and some of them had pretty close encounters and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
One woman, the first one I interviewed, she had this encounter, and it turned out later that they found out it was more like an abduction.
Oh, that's a whole different kettle of fish.
Yeah.
I have, right after I met Calvin, and Calvin Parker is whose experience this is. So y'all have heard about him, and I actually got to interview him several years ago and spent some time with he and his bride in Phoenix. But what really got me about his case was that I was doing a Gulf Coast Paranormal conference, and this woman came up to me after I finished speaking, because I spoke about the Pascagoula encounter. And she said, I saw that night.
Oh,
I said, did you?
What's her
Where
name?
were you? I don't remember.
Oh.
But she was in her car. They saw it come down. And then it was bizarre because she saw what was happening. She didn't see what got out of the craft. She just saw the craft come down. And she was a little bit older than Calvin. But it was, to me, that was just, and the reason I don't have her information is because I gave her my card because they were leaving. It had been storming and she wanted to get back to Biloxi. And I'm like, you saw that? Oh my gosh, I need to talk with you. And so I gave her my card and I never heard back from her. I don't know if my enthusiasm might have set her aback a little bit, but I tried to be very cool and contained, right?
Was her name Maria?
No.
Oh,
I know
okay.
it wasn't Maria.
Oh, gee, I wish.
I think it was Janice. I think it was Janice or Janet. So, but she never had any contact with Calvin, and I don't think she ever reported it. So it was like,
yeah.
You're kidding. My research partner at the time and I were doing a mutual presentation, and I was just like, my whole focus was just like, okay, you're going to have to take this for a minute, dude. So I was just like, but I was so excited. And I had because when Philip had put me in touch with Calvin, and then I met Calvin at the UFO Congress, and it was just, we became good friends. And his bride is one of the nicest women on the planet. And so we spent like every meal pretty much together and getting to know each other because we were basically neighbors. And I just love that family. And losing their child was so horrible. And then, Calvin's experience, he had some very tough times in his life.
Boy, he did.
I just think that he was such a great human being.
Well, everybody that knows him just totally trusts him. I mean,
Oh, yes.
if you wanted to abduct the right person, it was him because he's so honest.
So honest and so not about being the focus of attention. And, you know, got to go to the police because they were damaged,
Mhm.
and that whole situation, Calvin, I think, is the more credible witness of the two. And although Charlie was, there too, obviously, and dealt with that. But I just think that Calvin was such a special man.
Well,
And
he didn't want the fame at all. They always
no,
say, these people are seeking fame. Well, he sure didn't want it.
he hid from it.
Yeah,
I mean,
for
they
years.
got that boat built and he was, yeah, I'm gone. But, I just think that, and like I said, that was in my neck of the woods. And that was one of the most intense abduction experiences of that era. People didn't really talk about it. Not to mention the fact that this was a completely different species that was interacting with them than anything that had been reported before. I mean, they look like the Michelin Man with crescent wrenches for hands.
Yeah.
I mean, it was so different. And it's just interesting. And we're going to bring up some of the information that Irina Tokomama is putting in chat because she is from Japan and she is sharing some of the things. If you want to see freaky stuff, Japan has UFOs, and every time we get an earthquake, now this is true. Every time we get an earthquake, we get UFOs in the sky, and especially near our nuclear power plants. UFOs in Japan goes together. She is the host of the Spooky Japan podcast, part of the Things Network, which I'm also part of. And she also sent me my very first Japanese Christmas card, and it was beautiful. So, and I know I've already told you that, Irene, but it was so cool. But, she said that some of the items we created were taught by aliens here in our country, from medicine and the katana. We taught how to make were from aliens and not by man. So was the Shinto religion created by aliens. So that's interesting because, Irene, I didn't know that. Irina, did you?
No.
See, that's why I love doing this show, right?
Yeah.
We get so much information. And so now I'm going to be spending all week learning about this and trying to figure out the time zones so I can get Irene on here talking about that. So you're ready, right, Irene? But I am just so impressed that, back to Calvin, that when he got ready, I don't even know how Philip Mantle found him. Do you know?
Yeah, Charlie had written a book, and Philip published the book, and then he heard about Calvin. And I don't remember how he got in, but he wanted to get in contact with him. And then Calvin, his wife, was sort of saying, you ought to write this up, because he didn't even talk about it for, 50 years. And then Philip and Wynette both hovered over Calvin, and he decided to say something.
Well, he didn't tell Wynette no much.
No.
Okay, he did not tell her no very often. That was a couple made in heaven. They were so brilliant together. She is a special woman.
They both are.
Yeah. And, it's really, because I think that it's fun that you and I both have experience with Calvin, because I would swear whatever was necessary to his honesty and his lack of attention seeking. He ran from attention, like you said. I mean, he just didn't want to have anything to do with that. How did you get him to talk to you?
Well, I mainly talked to the other people that had, the other witnesses. Um, but he finally started talking. I think, his wife and Philip had a lot to do with it.
Mhm. Well, I'm glad that your take on him was that he's as honest as they come, too, because I was absolutely, I mean, I know that. So it's nice that to have that validated too by somebody that talks to a lot of these people. Well, I think that when you have a witness that's as traumatized as both of them were,
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, the cops left them in an interrogation room with a recorder running. They thought they were going to get them. And the whole time they're just like, oh my God, because it's so obvious they weren't lying because they didn't change their story when they were talking to each other solo. Everything was factual. Everything was, nothing changed. And I think probably till Calvin died, nothing changed.
Yeah,
So,
I think, yeah. And they were just terrified, especially Calvin, because he was younger.
yeah.
I
What
mean,
was he, 17?
18,
Eight.
18 or 19. There's two
Eight.
different references, so I don't
Yeah.
know. But he was a teenager anyway. And that really changed his whole life.
Well, not for the better.
No.
I
I
mean,
mean, he had plans for his life, and they changed a lot.
well, but he had a good life. So I think that, he loved his wife, he loved his family, did lose his son, and the hat.
Yeah, fishing.
Every day with the hat. I love that too. And when he was speaking, I don't think he had done a lot of lecturing at the point that I first heard him. And it was interesting because he had the hat on. He was just sitting in a chair. And it was, all right, they wanted me to tell you what happened. So here we go. And that's all he gave. I mean, there wasn't a lot of Q&A. A lot of people wanted to ask, but he was just such a simple human and such a good person, and he didn't want really to talk about it. Yet there was this book.
Yeah.
Philip wanted him to talk, and I think really that was a good thing, right? It was kind of cathartic.
Oh, yeah. I think, after waiting 50 years and not saying anything, well, then he decided that was a thing to do.
Yeah. It was a big change.
Yeah.
So, for everyone listening that's just come into chat, you can go and put the hashtag fate in the chat room. And at the end of the night, there's going to be a random drawing. The computers are going to do it. Carl's the whiz on that. And we will be getting a magazine out to you. And I've got some cool ones. We've got some that are older. Phyllis has spoiled me rotten. I've got a gluttony of choice here. So we'll see what happens. But I think that, I don't know. I just think that that was such a strange interaction because
Oh,
they
no.
fought them. Do you know of many cases where the victims actually, they were victims, where the victims actually physically fought back like that?
Well, they couldn't fight back because they'd been paralyzed.
Well, but Calvin gave it a shot. I mean, they were paralyzed, but when they came out of the craft, they had their autonomy back to a degree. And Calvin said that he was trying everything he could to fight.
Yeah. Well, theirs was just totally different from anything that had been reported before. I mean, in all kinds of ways, because like the aliens often are presented as skinny little things, with big heads and eyes and all that.
Or
Well,
like,
they just
you
had
know,
the opposite. They were just sort of porky little guys with big skin and no eyes and all that, and they looked different.
like the Michelin Man with a
Yeah,
pointed head and claws. I mean, the claws would have blown my mind.
there were some other sightings with claws, of beings with claws around that time too. Um, I just came across one recently, and I meant to
Really?
make notes on it. Um, but yeah, and then also um, a lot of times the aliens, if a person's experiencing pain or things, the aliens will just wave their hand over their eyes, and then they won't. Well, both of Charlie and Calvin thought they were injected,
Hmm.
which was also different.
Yeah. I can't even imagine being confronted with that situation.
Well,
I thought I'm. Go ahead.
yeah, I think something like that. It's not like you're have a normal fear. I think it's something like you have a real awful fear that's a lot worse than being a normal fear.
Well, I mean, it's visceral because you think that you're about to be killed.
Yeah,
And I
it might be
just,
worse than that though.
or worse than that. Well, yeah. I mean, there are fates worse than death. And I just, everybody that I talk to who has an abduction experience, um, it just, I don't know how they can be comfortable in normal society following that. A lot of them aren't. When you talk to people, like Kathy Martin does the experiencer groups and such, and I've been in areas with that at a bunch of different alien related conventions. When you talk to people to get the information for your books, do they come across pretty forthright with you? Are they open and able to talk about it comfortably?
Well, uh, a lot of the people I've been talking to are the ones that are other witnesses for Pascagoula, and Calvin and Charlie got very, very severely harassed.
Mm-hmm.
And so the other people, and back then the government was saying there's no such things as UFOs. You know, if you say that, you're crazy. So you can't, report it. So the people didn't report it because they heard all the harassment and everything. Everybody was telling them this didn't exist. But at the time it happened, the person that was taking notes in the police department said that he got about 50 calls from all over the place of people seeing something that was out of line. And he also had people come in and report to the police. So there were a lot of other people that saw something unusual. I mean, it wasn't just them, but so I think that's one reason why the police department were more open-minded. But there were a whole lot of other witnesses, but people were scared to say anything.
Well, that's like the woman I met at that conference that night. She had never told anybody that she saw that.
Well, that's what I've run into too, that a lot of these people didn't say anything about it because of the harassment, and plus the government's saying everybody's crazy. But now they're talking about it because it's a lot more open.
Right.
And so most people, remember it well because, maybe 50 years
ago. Don't forget
that. That's not something you forget. And then also there was the abduction at the same time, so they know what time it was too. And they were, a lot of them saw something weird that night, and everybody, their friends told them they're crazy or something. Then the next day they heard about the abduction, and so they knew, had some reference to say, yeah, I'm not crazy, which helped them. But so I've been talking to a lot of people that had a lot of experiences, and a lot of them had kind of in-depth experience. They didn't just see something.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Was
And
that the only abduction though? The guys?
no, the first person I talked to was Maria Blair, and she was the first witness. And the way we found her is that Calvin had given a talk, in, I think it was in a library someplace, and it was on YouTube. And somebody had written in and said, "Yeah, my parents watched the abduction." And so Philip got a hold of her and found out that her mother was Maria Blair and gave me Maria's name. Well, Maria Blair had this story about that. She hadn't talked about it except to her kids, but she and her husband were in a car. They were actually on the other side of the Pascagoula River, and they saw this thing going on then. But also, they were waiting because her husband was going to go out and on a ship and restock or whatever they do it on an oil rig, and he was waiting for his supervisor who was late, and so they were sitting in the car waiting, and she saw this thing flying around, and she said it wasn't like anything normal. It was like an airplane looking for something or about to land or something. She said this was really, really weird. And then she said that her husband decided to go to the ship, and so they walked down the pier, and it was about 9 o'clock. And this thing flopped up in front of her as she was walking along, and it looked like a person. And then it flopped back down. It didn't come back to air or anything. She was really upset about that. And then they went to the ship, and she didn't come back until 12, which also, didn't make sense. So anyway, I kept in contact with her and kept, asking, and she said something was wrong. And then a couple years later, her husband became very ill, and he later unfortunately died. But right before he went on a ventilator, he told her that they had been abducted and that he hadn't talked about it because, he'd get harassed, and he was a man and he wanted his job and everything. And so she had him talk to Philip, and they recorded him and everything else. So this was like a second abduction at the
Wow.
same time as Calvin and Charlie were abducted, which is pretty weird. I mean, you don't
Well, that's so
get
rare.
once. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not familiar. Have you come across that before, that case?
I think it's about the only one.
That's
I think,
crazy.
yeah. I think the only one where two separate groups of people were abducted at the same time, maybe by the same thing in the same location.
Was the wife taken with the husband and she didn't remember it?
She didn't
Oh, wow.
remember it, and then he told her about it. And then she started remembering. Then she went into hypnosis after that and remembered more.
I'll bet that was a tough hypno session.
I think they all were.
I think they all are, because there's a reason that we suppress things, and that the only way they come back out is through hypnosis, because we can't cope with them. And sometimes we can't even cope with them through hypnosis. I know that it's hard no matter what you're going to do with that. So I just think that, I don't know, when you and I were talking, I told you that I see stuff around Pensacola, NAS Pensacola all the time, because I'm on the Alabama side of the coast. And I see things that don't necessarily look like they come from NAS Pensacola, because they're not behaving appropriately, But and I see, because I'm a sky watcher, I lay in a hammock, I have dogs, I'm outside, and but I've got a mountain on one side of me and big trees on the other, so I have a very limited expanse of sky to watch very much. But at the beach, I can see everything. And there's a lot of times, if I go in the winter, that I'm the only person on the beach, because snowbirds go to bed early. And people that are from there, they're not outside much when it's cold. But it's really kind of interesting. And in fact, Lori Dorsey, who's in chat, and I were out there one night, and she comes from Ohio and comes down to spend a week with me in the winter. And she was blown away too by some of the things that we saw. And it's not scary because nothing really is going to be that interactive, I think, around those bases, but because you've got Kessler and Biloxi, and you've got another air station. Then you've got NAS Pensacola, and there's some Coast Guard bases too. So there's not going to be anything, I think, that's looking like, hello, I'm a UFO. I mean, they're just kind of like, we're getting through here now. But it's so interesting to see them because they're very different, and their flight patterns or flight behavior is very different. And I know that they test everything out there, because if you go further down to Destin, you've got Eglin Air Force Base. That's a straight Air Force. There's stuff all along that coast. And I know there's test stuff up there. So I don't get real blown away all the time. But when you see something, it's like, hello, then it's cool. Disconcerting sometimes when you're the only person out there. But, I stay close to the buildings, right? Because I'm really not interested in having a cognitive abduction experience.
Yeah.
I heard Calvin. I'm just like, nope, I'm good. Thank you. Do I know for sure that I haven't? No, because I don't think anybody knows for sure, unless whatever they do breaks. But, it's, you'd mentioned the Betty and Barney Hill situation. And I think that the worst thing I've ever heard was Barney Hill's regression therapy, the segment that I heard. And I just think that not every alien is going to be our friend. You found that to be true, haven't you?
Well, I'm trying to be neutral and just, collect the information, not take sides. So
Well, sure. No, but I mean, and I get that because you're a researcher. But while some seem relatively benign, and like Joanne in chat mentions Travis Walton, I really think that Travis was taken to save him because they didn't want to leave a dead human after he went through that backwash from their takeoff. I don't think anybody meant to abduct Travis Walton. And when I've heard him, and I've talked with him about it, and, just in conversation that we had, but he was like, when I woke up, they looked like bugs and it scared him to death because he's like, these are huge bugs. What the heck? But he said that even while he was unconscious, he could feel how damaged he was. And, so he wouldn't really rouse, but he knew that he was very damaged. And I think that was accidental. And I think that the reason they took him was to heal him. But when he reacted to those bugs, they took him. I mean, they left. They left the room where he was and came back as Nordics. And so that they looked human. And to me, I'm just like, they'd have had to start that way. I mean, I don't know what you do. I don't know how you deal with that. And probably the way he did, he was coming up to handle business. And then, next thing after they got him well, obviously, but well enough, there he was at the phone booth and didn't know how he got to the phone booth. But it's just so each abduction story, there's so many variations. I don't even know how when you write your book, are you presenting just A, B, C, D correlates to A, B, D, F? Or what is your methodology with what you're taking from these experiencers?
Well, one thing is it seems to me like abduction is more complicated than what it's. I mean, it's presented as people being taken captive and up in a UFO, and they take your samples and all that. And some of them are pretty scary, like where they put a big needle in you and things like that, and painful. But another thing I've been working on is that that's not the only thing that happens. I mean, what happens is all these other things that, I mean, they always concentrate on induction. You've been captured. You're in a place and all that. But the other things that happen are things like you'll see a light, or you'll go through a wall, or you levitate. And nobody pays attention to this, but there's a lot of other things that go on kind of with abductions. And it makes me think it's something more complicated than just being captured and that, because it seems like all the physics and everything is logical just goes out the window. And so I'm trying to figure out, and I just am kind of exploring, but I don't know. I think there's something more complex about abduction than what, the general idea.
Well, I mean, if they're able to put aside the laws of physics as we know them, that's a big deal.
Yeah. I mean, that seems like more of a big deal than being held captive is a terrible experience, because, you don't know whether they'll kill you or torture you or what. But also, besides that, having everything like gravity and everything, go out the window, that's something else too.
Have there been, in what you're researching, have there been people of science abducted?
Yeah, and I can't remember his name. Yeah, I think so. There's been definitely people of science that have had a lot of sightings and things like that. But I don't think people in science talk about it. So.
Well, depends on their science. But if you're trying to keep your fellowship, maybe you wouldn't come forward, right?
Yeah. I imagine they always, whenever you say UFOs, they always trot out a scientist, and the scientists say, oh, we're the only intelligent life in the universe. No UFOs exist and all that, like Carl Sagan and all those other people. I mean, he's dead now.
Or Seth Shostak of SETI.
Yeah. He's always been billions and billions of years, and they can't possibly get here. Well, maybe they're more advanced than us, for one thing.
Maybe they can do that slingshot.
Yeah. But I think up until recently, scientists didn't go around talking about it. I imagine as many scientists get abducted as anybody else, but I don't think they would say anything.
It would be cool if you were a practical physicist, okay, to be taken and get to talk to them about this propulsion system that you're using. I mean, if you could maintain and not lose your mind with fear, you could have a good conversation.
Yeah.
Except
that maybe so far beyond us that, they wouldn't know anything.
But wouldn't it be fun to contemplate?
Yeah.
They could come back with the propulsion system if they, maintained. So I wonder if there's any scientists willing to volunteer for that. But
probably there are, but
well, I mean, I'm sorry. If I would not want Calvin's experience, but there have been others that didn't sound so horrifying. I know people that seem to have a relationship with, repeat abductees
Hmm.
kind of people. And it's almost like it starts out as a grudging friendship, but it seems to become a relationship. And I know one woman who had a relationship with a abductor, and it evolved into a relationship instead of just being an abductor abductee thing. And she said that she had a child and that she gets to see that child periodically, that he doesn't live here. And she was being brought forward by Grant Cameron. And I thought, well, that's a fairly serious researcher with a little bit of different attitude than I have, but still a researcher. And I heard her speak the first time she ever spoke. And it's just kind of like, I didn't know what to think. Have you talked to people that have had relationships with their abductors?
Well, yeah. And that's something I don't understand is that if I, there's some people that are talking to aliens and they're like their friends, but
Mm-hmm.
like if I talk to an alien, I'd want a witness. I mean, I'd be scared to death to talk
Yes.
to an alien by myself. But some people, it doesn't seem to bother them. They just say, "Well, I talked to this alien," and just like it's another person, but um, sounds, and they're perfectly sane people. I mean, they're not crazy or anything.
I have a friend who talks to aliens. They visit her. I mean, like, they have names,
Yeah.
and,
Uh huh.
they're from different galaxies, but they're not from the same galaxy. I
Yeah.
mean, she talks to different species, and she's related their conversations to me. And I mean, she's a friend. I would have no reason to doubt her other than that sounds nuts. But it's not nuts because I know her. And it's so not what you hear about happening.
Yeah. And I mean, know people like that too that have kind of like friends or relationships with aliens, and it doesn't seem to bother them. I mean, they just seem to, just like it's another person or something. It
Well,
would
it is just
definitely
another,
bother
yeah.
me.
Well, it would depend, and she and I have been friends for years. And so I know who her contacts are. And she had actually gone camping and saw a craft that she didn't recognize, a kind of craft she didn't recognize. And she had fear in that moment. So whatever was there wasn't a good contact, I would not think, because I trust her instinct. She's very smart. She's very grounded. I mean, she's not a person given to making things up just for attention. She's just very, this is me. I'm happy. If you don't like me, you're missing out, but that's okay. Just kind of in her world and happy. And so when she started telling me things, I was like, okay, you know, and it took me a little while to be very accepting of that because I thought, well, that's very different.
It sure is.
And so, and I'm not given to woo, really, but that was very different, and it was somebody I trusted. And then she said that one of them had decided that he was going to protect me, and I was like, at my house, right, not going anywhere else. But yeah, because I'm her friend, there's somebody that shows up here periodically. And I never see them. I feel the energy, but I never see them. And I don't know. But I'll call her. I'll call her when I feel that. And I'm like, was somebody just here? She's like, oh yeah, that was the name. And I'm like, I'm good, right? So she's like, they were just checking in. Yeah, you're good. And my dogs react. That's what really got me. Because at first I'm like, oh, well, this is just, suggestion, whatever. And where I was feeling it, my dogs went, and I was like, okay, we're picking up that phone. And because I don't get that level of communication. I read energy. I feel energy. I've, to my knowledge, have not had a conversation relevant to that. And I don't know what I would think if I did.
Well, the only possible alien I talked to was that guy that chased us with the truck.
Yep. He was probably,
I don't. Well, at first I didn't have any idea because he was so strange acting, and for years and years and years I wondered. And then just a couple of years ago, I asked my sister, and she didn't remember talking to him, and so that gave me the creeps, and it made me think this is more involved than I ever thought it was. So, for years and years and years, it's more weirder.
Well, I had forgotten that aspect. That would lead one to think that it was
maybe an alien. Yeah. Maybe he deleted himself from my sister's mind, or he put it in my mind.
Right.
So.
But
I haven't had any more, discussions with aliens aside from that.
Well, I was.
But he told me I was crazy too.
No.
I mean, I thought he was telling me that I wasn't really seeing anything. Yeah.
When I'm going to move back over kind of to the nuts and bolts, if that's okay.
Okay.
But your book, Sacred Corridors, Secrets Behind the Real Project Blue Book, Wright-Patt Air Force Base, Roswell, Battelle Memorial. What, and the memory medal, because that to me is one of the things that I find fascinating, because their physics aren't our physics, as far as we know, as far as general science knows. That how did you get interested in that side of things?
Well, I'm in Ohio, and I'm not too far from Wright-Patterson.
Right.
And I also worked at Battelle, and I'd been at Wright-Patterson in the secret area too. For example, my employer sent me to Wright-Patterson several times for conventions and things, and I was in the secret area. But I also worked at Battelle, and I knew a lot of people from Ohio. And Ohio's where Project Blue Book took place. And Project Blue Book had a investigation at Battelle. And so I knew people that other people that worked at Battelle that knew, things like that. And like at Wright-Patterson, I knew the archivist, and he took us around to secret places and all kinds of things. And so I had some experience in both places where nobody knows anything about it because it's classified. I mean, Wright-Patterson, it's famous for the museum, but the rest of it's chain link fences and very secure. So I was in, those places where they are secure. And
was it because of your clearance that they could do that?
Well, the first times I went, they just it was my employer sent me to conventions at Wright-Patterson, and they I was in the secured area, not allowed in. So while I was there, I really explored and went around, took pictures of things secretly and stuff like that, and put it in my book. But I also worked at Battelle, and it's secured too, and so I had the clearance to get in. And I knew people that worked there that had clearances too.
Do all of you people with those clearances just sit around and talk about this stuff?
Well, I didn't have a clearance to do UFOs, and nobody I know did except one person. And she was a person, Jenny Zeidman. Have you ever heard of her?
Mm-hmm.
She was a friend of Dr. Hynek's. But she was also the investigator on the Coyne helicopter case. And she worked at Battelle, and she had clearances. And she had a lot of notes. In my book, Sacred Corridors, I used a lot of her notes, such as she wrote to Dr. Hynek for a long time and gave me the notes. And so I published those, Dr. Hynek's handwriting and letters to her and things like that.
Right.
And so she had a perspective on it. And I just, a couple of years ago, had a whistleblower type article in the MUFON Journal about it, that when the Project Blue Book was saying that UFOs don't exist, and whenever anybody see a UFO, they'd have a scientist come out and say, "Oh, you just saw Venus. You couldn't possibly see a UFO. They don't exist."
Right.
But at the same time, they were saying that to people. They had a secret study going on at Battelle to try to figure out what UFOs are. And so they were saying one thing out of one side of their face, UFOs don't exist. The other place, they're having a secret study to see what's going on. And so anyway, then they had this Robertson panel. You've heard of that?
Mm-hmm.
They had a bunch of scientists and fed them information, and they came up with the conclusion that UFOs don't exist. And not only did they conclude that, they concluded that they ought to harass anybody that reports UFOs and all that too. Well, there was this memo from Battelle, from the top of Battelle, that was, the head of the study that was studying UFOs, that wrote to Project Blue Book and said they were going to have the Robertson meeting. He said they were going to use their data from Battelle. And he said, our data isn't finished. We are still studying it. We don't know what it is. And so the CIA went right ahead and had the Robertson panel. And the Robertson people said there's no UFOs and everything, fed them data, even though the data wasn't there. Battelle didn't have the data yet. And so it was just a total farce.
No doubt. That's a lot of the governmental stuff relevant to this. Why do you think they're so afraid of acknowledging this scenario?
I don't know. I worked for the DIA, and my supervisor, we were supposed to identify airplanes from satellite photography. And my supervisors reported a UFO to their supervisors. And the supervisors are very high. And their supervisors told them that it didn't exist, that it was a spot on the film, even though they were the experts at identifying airplanes and things. And they didn't understand it either, but higher up in the government, somebody's saying, UFOs don't exist. And up until recently, now they're a little more accepting slightly. Yeah. But
well, it still hurts them every time they have to discuss it. You can see the pain, right? They're going to take us out.
Yeah.
But I hate that they did that, though. Just going off without knowing that they didn't have the information and just making a statement.
Yeah, they've been doing that. They keep saying nothing to worry about. They don't exist. When they, with that study, you know for sure that the government didn't know what they were and was curious. So even though they were saying they don't exist, don't worry about them to everybody else.
There's a lot of money in black projects that would indicate that they do care. Because, first and foremost, they're humans, right? For whatever level of security and whatever, black op department that they're in, they have people that they love and care about. And they know that this stuff is real. And it gets frustrating as a person that just gets, because seriously, I do this and I talk to people that have knowledge. I don't have my own personal knowledge other than my experiences. And it's so, I wonder sometimes how these disinformation agents go home at night and look at their families. And I'm sure that they would do everything to protect their families, but it's just really odd to me that people know this stuff is real and know what different projects have been done testing on us, by them and perhaps by other forces away from this planet. And they still, you're crazy. There's no way. No, we would never do that. Well, they did a lot of other experimentation and stuff as themselves and back in the day. So I don't really trust that much. Maybe is the right way to put it.
Well, what I worry about that is probably ridiculous, that I think the aliens can do mind control.
Yeah.
And I think maybe they mind control some of the top people in the government. That's a insane idea, but I just thought.
Oh, it is not an insane idea. And there is documentation and there are documented studies of mind control experimentation being done by our government. And they were very effective with it. And with the research that you've done, I know you know that. It's just part of that program of you have thousands of people that come forward and say, we saw this. Mm-hmm. You have, they're always like, well, there have, when there need to be aliens on the White House line. Well, there were alien craft in White House airspace and they were televised. And then, you had Battle of LA, which was a real thing. And that was not our craft. And that was a monstrously big craft, and those were real shells going into the sky and real reporting at the time. And, it happens. Things get out of their control. And yet they still are like, oh, pay no attention to the men behind the curtain.
Yeah.
We've got this. No, really you don't. Because there were, 13 craft? 12 or 13 craft that were over the White House. And then, whatever that was in the Battle of LA. Those are just the ones that we know about, that there was footage of, that real people saw. And nobody ever talks about them.
Well, there was that 1952 or 3 example of the UFOs over the White House in the airspace over there. And they said, oh, this is just an atmospheric inversion. Yeah. Well, once they had a real big atmospheric inversion over central Ohio, you'd go out and about choke to death. Yeah. But nobody went around seeing UFOs. No. And that's ridiculous.
Well, they scrambled They scrambled jets on the
Yeah.
ones over the White House. That was not an atmospheric inversion. You don't send fighter jets up to take out an atmospheric inversion.
No,
And
and what was funny about it was it took them all day long to get the jets up, too. I mean, you'd
Yeah.
think they would send them up pretty fast, but they didn't.
Well, maybe they were not functional
You know, or maybe
until it was
somebody
weren't
up ahead,
functional until they
up
were.
above wasn't.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I mean, they block other stuff. It's so interesting. This is a topic that I'm so lucky to have you here to talk about. So I'm so glad you're
I'm
here.
so glad to talk to you.
Well, the stuff with Dr. Hynek, I got so tickled. I got to meet his son, and he was really interesting. And I got to hear him lecture, and I got to just talk to him. And my favorite thing was, oh yeah, we had UFO Christmas ornaments. I was like, that's so cool. And that sounds just like what I've heard about your dad. I wish I could have met him. But, I just think, what was the main thing that you took from those notes that you were using?
One interesting thing that was reported in some papers was he met Neil Armstrong, and they talked together, and which suggests that Neil Armstrong was interested in UFOs. But Neil Armstrong invited Hynek to meet him, and we had the written thing, and so that was pretty interesting.
I would have liked to have been a fly on the wall in that discussion.
Yeah. Yeah, I've met Paul too, and I've talked to Dr. Hynek, but I never met him. I think maybe I met him once in person, but
Yeah.
it was when I was a lot younger.
What is the biggest? I'm going to save that question. I'm going to wait on that question.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, what is the biggest thing other than your personal experience? Because there was no doubt after that. I know there wasn't. But as far as work related things that, when because you've written books on just about everything. And I'm trying to get back to, the other stuff that you had written. I am interested, because you've got the UFOs today, 70 years of lies, misinformation, and government cover-up. I know the research that had to go into that. You've got so much. What are the top three things? It doesn't have to be in order. What are the top three things that have made you say, outside of your personal experience, holy crap, this is real? I mean, you've seen so much. You've had access to so much. You have talked to some of the greatest minds in that side of the field, as well as other fields too. I mean, your research is impeccable, and your reputation precedes you. I mean, I know the work that you do. What are the main things that have made you say, okay, this is real. This is something that nobody really wants to acknowledge and talk about, but they know it's real too. And what do you do with that knowledge?
Well, I think one of it that I investigated that really impressed me was, I think we called it the dancing lights or something. We'd written it up in several places, but it was this place near Logan, Ohio. And these people were living in a farmhouse. And they began to see these lights above their cornfield. They'd blink off and on and move around and things. And they reported them. And the thing stayed, usually with a UFO, it's there for a second and then it disappears. And you say, well, this looked fair, and it's no longer there. Well, this was different because these lights were there. And they called and reported them to all kinds of places. They called Wright-Patterson, they called the the TV, the sheriff, and all kinds of authorities. And the police came out and investigated and watched them. And they said one thing that an airplane flew over, and it flew over in grid-like pattern while these flashing lights were in the over their cornfield. And so these investigators came. It was on TV and everything, but nobody could explain it. And that seemed like a really good sighting because it stayed around. There were a lot of witnesses. The investigators didn't know what was going on and everything else. And then there was another one, I think it was called the Ravinia sighting, where these policemen were, one of them was Neff and one of them was named Spar. Do you remember that? Maybe not. These two policemen were out by their car in Ohio, in this area, and they heard a report on their police radio that somebody saw a UFO in Michigan, and they laughed about it and all that. Ha ha ha. Well, then they looked up, and this thing was up above them. It came over, and it was up above them. And then they were terrified, and they ran and got in their cruiser. Well, this was before iPhones and everything. So they called the sheriff's department and said, you know, we're seeing this UFO. And the sheriff said, do you have a camera? And they didn't. And then the police sergeant or whatever it was at the police station said, well, shoot it. And they thought this was not a good idea. And so they followed it. And they followed it for a long distance. And the thing would, if they got too far behind, the thing would wait for them. Or if they went around the town, it would go up above. And so they were on the radio the whole time with the police department. And they went all the way across Ohio. And they went into Pennsylvania. And they passed, I think, the airport in Akron. And they heard that Akron sent up jets. But the thing was a lot slower. It was just following them, you know. But there were a whole lot of other witnesses that saw it along this chase, and it went quite a long ways. And then it disappeared finally. But it was a really good story. And so then they had this Project Blue Book guy come out, and he told them it was Venus. I mean, he made these sheriffs look like they were just totally stupid. And it ruined their lives because nobody would trust them from then on because they couldn't tell Venus from something that had chased them across 2 state lines. And it just ruined their lives because the Project Blue Book guy was a liar.
Mm-hmm. They did a lot of that. I don't understand
Yeah,
that.
this impressed me because they had a lot of witnesses, plus the UFOs stayed there while they were being observed and things like that, which
they allowed it.
Happen. Of course, the Pascagoula one's a pretty good one because there were a lot of witnesses on that one.
Yeah.
And I talked to them.
Did you talk to the one that saw the alien under the water in Pascagoula?
The alien, there was
one that was like under the dock. The people that were across the river.
Uh-huh.
they saw one that was like swimming under the dock they were at.
That's the one I
And
think I was telling you about.
but I
That it,
don't know if they remember, because I don't remember you saying that they had one on their side of the river. And I mean, if I was seeing what was happening to Charlie and Calvin.
well, they didn't know what was happening then.
Oh, okay.
They
Okay.
just knew something was going on at the other side of the river. And then later, the next day, they heard about the abduction. And so they thought it was the abduction. But when it was going on, they didn't know. They just saw something going on.
Right. Well, that was a part of that experience that blew my mind, was that the people that were on the other side of the river from Calvin and Charlie were on a dock
Uh-huh.
and saw one of those creatures swim underwater, looking up at them on the dock. And they were just like, oh no. And, because there's a lot of weird stuff in that water in Mississippi. And I mean, could have been a garfish, it could have been whatever, but they were absolutely convinced that it matched the description of Calvin's aliens. And for them to be amphibious gives a whole different side to that, I thought.
Well, there was an underwater sighting, a real good one that happened there about, I think it was November the 6th, which was just not too long after the abduction, which was October the 11th. And this was these fishermen. I talked to one of them. There's only one alive now. And there were 11 people that saw it, but they saw this thing floating around. And they called the Coast Guard about it. The Coast Guard went out and looked at it too, and nobody figured out what it was. But that was very seriously investigated by the Coast Guard, and the sighting was real close to where the abduction was.
Was that sighting of a being or of a craft?
A craft.
Okay. I did not know that. And that's
It made the news, just like the abduction there, and then the thing underwater also made the news.
That's wicked cool, because the thing underwater that I heard the report of was a being. So
Well,
the fact that they had a USO also, that's crazy.
that sounds like Maria, that she saw this. She was walking along the pier, and this thing flopped up that looked like a being.
Mhm.
And then it went back down, and she never saw it come up for air. But then when her husband said several years later they were abducted, well, he said he saw them swimming back across the river too.
Okay. That must be what I'm talking about. It sounds very
Yeah.
similar to that. Interesting.
Yeah, sounds like we're talking about the same thing.
That's cool, right? I mean, because my source was not,
Well, maybe you had another one. That would be fantastic if you did.
I'm going to have to go through my note. I have notebooks. I journal about shows, and I have 10 years worth of notes. I will find that.
Great.
I don't think it was when I talked. I don't think it was when I talked to Calvin on the show, but I will find it. But I know I don't have the name of the woman that was at that event, because I didn't have anything to write on, and we were just kind of passing time. But she was actually driving on the interstate coming through the Crane area, the White Crane Reserve. And so she just saw it looking down toward the shipyards and down through there.
A lot of people saw it from the air, from the freeway.
From that highway. Yeah. I mean, but there was no place for them to stop and watch it either, because that's bridges. Yeah. So they couldn't do anything but note it and keep going. I would have loved to have seen that, but I wouldn't have been thrilled with it when I found out that it was somebody that became my friend later. You know, gee, Calvin, hey, I saw that happen to you, but we're good. He was such a great guy, such a great man. So, and his bride's just a wonderful human too. But I was lucky that I got to spend time with them. I think that getting the chance, as you did, to have multiple interactions and work closely and do all that research, that had to be so neat.
Yeah, it was. And everybody seemed real friendly too.
Well, they pretty much are down there. I mean, they are
Southern people.
Southern people. Well, sometimes we can be feisty Southern people.
Oh, okay.
You know.
Yeah.
But I do want to let people know while we're on the topic that your book about Calvin that you wrote with Philip is Beyond Reasonable Doubt, the Pascagoula alien abduction.
Yeah.
And you did a good job with that.
Well, it had a lot of research in it.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to find it. I should have it. Here it is. This is a fantastic book. It's really well researched.
Yeah. And it's pretty. So that's nice too.
Yeah, there's a lot of evidence beyond a reasonable doubt.
You know, to be able to get to beyond a reasonable doubt, that's a high standard. And I know Calvin would be very appreciative of that, the work that went into that to validate his experience. And it was a hard thing.
Well, now it's nice because other people talk about it, and everybody was too repressed by the government to say anything back when it happened. So you didn't get a good investigation.
No. And I mean, Keesler Air Force Base was right there. I mean, there were military facilities all around that could have helped with that, would have helped with that, should have been scrambled to that. And as far as anybody knows, did you find any indication that any of them had been involved in that time frame?
Yeah, I think there were people like at Keesler that knew something about it, but they obviously didn't say anything because they were working. But I think there was a report here and there that they picked it up on radar, but if they did, it would have been probably classified. And so, some people said, yeah, they got it on radar, but I don't think they would have, reported it.
And it was such an interesting shaped craft too. I mean, it wasn't like what you hear about showing up.
Well, it was kind of like the Tic Tac that they have now. I mean, there's no wings and all that, levitated.
And the door slid, right?
Yeah, it's like they were just suddenly in there in this real bright light.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I can just picture a young Calvin in that situation, not knowing what was happening, but going to take them down with him. That's just, and that was his mindset too. I mean, he was trying to fight and couldn't.
I think they couldn't run away either. So they were stuck. And being paralyzed is pretty awful.
Well, yeah. I mean, and he described that when he spoke as much as he could because it was way too sensitive for him. And Wynette was there too, and I don't think he could have done it if she hadn't been. But, it was so emotional and so difficult. And, he just sat on a love seat kind of chair with a microphone telling his experience when I heard him. And I was so moved because he sounded like me. You know, he sounded like me. He was in the same age group as me. I mean, you know, he was closer to my husband's age, but still the same generation. And, you know, and Waynette was so supportive of that experience, of him sharing that experience. And, you know, he was just trying to get that boat finished. So they could just move out and get away from everybody to talk about that.
Yeah.
So, you know, that was,
Well, he really sacrificed because he was ill and he kept on working too.
yes, yes. And it was not an easy illness
Oh, yeah.
at all.
He had all kinds of things go wrong.
Yeah. And, you know, I think that when people read this book and they realize just what all was involved with this case, I mean, Betty and Barney Hill were the first reported abduction. They were also, I think, I may be mistaken, I think that they were the first regression therapy people.
I think
And
there was an abduction in South America before theirs that made the news pretty big. This
okay,
farmer had a abduction where he was on his tractor and this thing landed by the tractor, and this woman, he went in aboard, and this woman gave him some kind of chemicals or stuff and collected his sperm, and then they let him go. And he was a young kid then. He was a farmer, but he grew up to be a lawyer, and he always maintained it was the truth, and he was conscious of it though. But I think
Right.
that happened before Betty and Barney Hill, but it was down in South America.
I was not aware of that case.
I can't.
Okay.
It's Spanish, and I can't remember the exact. It's in my book, but I don't.
I'll
remember.
find it.
Okay, I'll let you know.
Well, yeah, but you're going to have to be specific. Which book is that in? UFOs Today?
I think it's in Beyond Pascagoula.
Okay. Well, I've got that one already, so
Oh,
I just
good.
haven't finished it yet. So, you know, it's to me that's an interesting thing, and I don't understand. And tell me if this really is that frequent a thing. They're very interested in our reproduction. Why would they have taken sperm? I mean, unless they were going to try to breed one of us.
Well, that's what Maria Blair, the one I told you about that had the abduction.
Mhm.
When she was hypnotized, she said that what they were doing was they were trying to take our body form so they could walk among us and be among us. That was hypnosis, so you don't know. But a lot of people do report that, such as Betty and Barney Hill.
Mhm.
And she said that she thought they were interested in her eggs or DNA and stuff like that. And who knows?
Did you know that? I can't remember who told me this. Might have been Kathy, might not have been. That that they couldn't work the zipper on Betty's dress.
Yeah.
Isn't that wild? That's the only reason that she wasn't stripped. They couldn't work the zipper. They come from God knows where, for how long, in these craft, and they're stumped by that.
Well, I think a lot of it's just a scene that they create for us too.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be my guess, because it doesn't make that, things like that don't make any sense at all.
No, it doesn't. But I mean, unless they don't wear clothes.
Yeah.
So,
But they should figure out a zipper though.
Well, maybe that was,
they can go, through galaxies and all, I think
But-
they could figure out a zipper.
befuddled by a zipper. Yes. But I just always thought that's such a random thing.
Uh-huh.
And that detail blows my mind. It really does. It always has. That's the one thing that trips me up for the first time I heard anything about that. About
Well,
the
maybe
whole,
they have a sense of humor though too, and they want to drive you crazy.
I'm sure they do. Well, I mean, they come around here, they don't abduct much in cities. They are in rural settings so that, there's not a vast number of witnesses. They're
Mhm.
smart because that's why, but then you hear that they've made a agreement with the government about taking so many people, that there's a bargain, a trade thing there. And it's like, you should never trust our government. What are you thinking? But, they're so smart, they're so far advanced, and yet in so many ways they're different. They're not that kind of smart. They're a different mindset. Kind of like physicists versus
The absent-minded professor.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's different Tom McNicholas says harder with zippers when dressing others.
Yeah.
Tom, I'm not going to ask, but okay. I'm teasing. Tom McNicholas is one of my favorite listeners, and it's he's very, very good with his comments. I love that. But it really is a lot different. I mean, when I had to care for my mom, she had, elastic because I couldn't do anything. And then when we had to go, it was hospital gowns. But it was just like, oh, well, okay.
They make those so ridiculous.
I know. And so attractive and sexy, right?
Oh yeah, you have to figure out, what band to put where and
and the fabric is hideous. I mean, it's just like, no, I'll make my own when the day comes to it.
Yeah.
But I really think that this has been such an interesting conversation.
Certainly has.
I have enjoyed every minute of it. And, if y'all if you have Amazon, go up there, and her books are under Irena McCammon Scott, and you can look it up under Irena Scott Books. And there's a bunch of them. And I really think that, well, there's not one that I would not look forward to reading. I'm already working on them. So, but the UFOs Today book, that is from 2017. And there's a lot of information in there. So that is the way to go and check it out. Now, if you have not already put #fate in chat, you're going to want to do that because we're about to do our random selection from the computer for an edition of Fate magazine sent to you. So I'm going to lean over here because
Hey,
I
Kat,
put it up here. Yes, sir.
tell everybody on your Twitter accounts to go to one of your YouTube channels.
Okay.
We can't enter off of Twitter.
Okay.
Tell them to go over there. We'll give them a few minutes to get on YouTube so they can enter the chance to win.
All right. Well, I think they're listening.
Yeah, they're listening. We got, let's see, you got 5 on Paranormal Experience on Twitter, and you got 4 on Radio Fate 1.
Okay. Well,
so
everybody,
those 9 people need to go to one of your YouTube channels.
Go to the YouTube channel, which is, I'm trying to pull that up.
Go to Kat Hobson. Go to Kat Hobson. YouTube channel.
That's the easiest one. Go to Kat Hobson. on YouTube, just do a quick search. You'll see my face and hit chat. We'll give it a couple of minutes here and put hashtag fate. I didn't realize that didn't feed. So I have told people tales inadvertently. So, I'm sorry. If you're going to chat, go to YouTube or Facebook or LinkedIn. I didn't know it wouldn't feed from X. My bad, guys. So we're going to chat amongst ourselves. Chitty chat, chat, chat. So, but again, on Amazon, it is Irena, Irena, Scott Bucks will get you to her. The UFOs today, 70 years of lies, misinformation, and government cover-up. We would never do that. Beyond reasonable doubt, the Pascagoula alien abduction. You've got females going ape, generating life and civilization. I think that's fascinating. Irena's Children, a true story of courage. Irena, Book 1, Wartime Ghetto.
That's
Uncle,
not mine.
that's not yours?
No.
Well, scratch that one.
Oh, I have mine on irenascott.com.
That's even better.
Get,
that way there's no confusion.
Yeah, you can just click on it and it immediately goes to Amazon.
Right. So I'm going to put that.
irenascott.com.
And that just fed out to everywhere. So
Oh, okay.
we're good with that. But, well, has anybody moved over? Okay, we need to go ahead and do it because we've only got like 4 minutes now. Are you ready?
Yeah, do a countdown, Kat.
All right, we're going to go from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Blast off. Lori Dorsey, I will bring your magazine to you next week as we fly up to Arkansas. So I'm so excited. I am going to be at the Ozark Mountain UFO Conference. So I will have Fate magazines with me, and come find me. We'll have a Coke. We'll have a cup of coffee. We'll wander around that free vendor mart, which has some of the coolest crystals and neat things too. And there'll be authors with their books. And I will actually be interviewing Ray Hernandez while I'm there. So I'm going to be bringing that to you when I come back. And you know what? It's so much fun. If you were in that area and you want to learn some stuff, it's a great place. It's Ozark Mountain Publishing and Ozark UFO Conference. So find it, check it out, see about all the speakers. And I will be doing a preview show on that again. And it's so much fun. Irena, I have enjoyed you beyond belief. This has been fantastic. Thank you.
It certainly has. Thank you so much.
Maybe we can do it again. Maybe we can do it again sometime. Okay. Thank you. Woo!
Thank you.
All right. For everyone listening, thank you so much. You're the reason for these shows, and we will see you next week. Same cat time, same cat channel. Good night.